Greetings. My name is Maurice Elias. I am from Rutgers University, Social, Emotional, and Character Development Lab, and I am pleased to be able to speak with you about enhancing youth voice, empowerment, and engagement in individuals, groups, and classrooms. Our lab has been operating nationally and internationally for 40 years, and so everything that I'm going to be sharing with you has been tried and true, tested in practice. And so you'll be seeing a lot of different techniques. And from those, I hope you'll be able to pick up some that you'll be eager and able to implement in your work with kids, both in and out of school. And I will note, as is the conference preference, there will be a follow-up session July 1st from 4 to 5 p.m. I'll say more about that later. So that not only will you hear some of the ideas, but as you think about them more and maybe even have a chance to try them out, we can have a follow-up conversation about them. So there's a crisis of citizenship in the United States and many other countries, and the solution begins with our youth. We must prepare our youth for the tests of life and not a life of tests. So in the next 35, 40 minutes or so, we will demonstrate specific approaches that are used in many, many situations in and out of school to build social and emotional learning skills and a sense of positive purpose through service. We'll talk about a specific example called Students Taking Action Together. And surrounding the entire presentation are the words of Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "Anyone can be great because anyone can serve." You'll see more information about this in this periodical, Getting Serious About SECD, that you can find at the website of our lab, secdlab.org, mentioned on the opening page. And you'll see more information as well about the application of what we're talking about in social studies and current events conversations. Again, the link is here. These are things for you to follow up on. We're going to hit the highlights and the practical parts today. I want us to start with the words of Sergeant Shriver. You may know Sergeant Shriver, or maybe you just know of him. Sergeant Shriver was the founder and operator of the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps was the inspiration for VISTA, which we now think of as VISTA AmeriCorps. And so Sergeant Shriver was one of the great inspiring figures in youth voice. He said, "We're going to ask our children not just to talk, but to act, serve, and live in accordance with a higher set of values and with a buoyant optimism." Boy, do we need buoyant optimism today. Shriver also said, "My legacy? I will tell you my legacy. When someone tells you that you can't do something, it's rubbish." So the two takeaways from Shriver are, number one, inspiration must precede remediation. Before we try to fix our kids, we need to inspire them. We need to give them a sense of positive purpose so they can channel their energies into doing great things in the world. You see, giving kids voice about things that don't matter ultimately is not a particularly effective strategy. When our kids see that what they can do makes a great difference, not only do they want to have voice, but they also want to be prepared to have the best possible impact, i.e. they become motivated to learn more. Now, everything we're talking about is predicated on a climate of psychological safety. That if we don't have a school climate that is supportive and safe and positive, engaging, if it's not a place where kids feel respected, then very little of constitution of any kind of consequence is going to come with regard to youth voice. So we know this from the research. We have to have a positive climate. Indeed, schools must make hard, prompt, relentless, and sustained professional decisions toward creating a healthy, caring, productive, safe learning environment for everyone walking into the school building, regardless of ability or other personal, ethnic, or economic characteristics. Now, these are prerequisites because otherwise voice will be constrained, voice will be stifled, and it won't be meaningful. So let's talk about one very specific technique to begin to help youth have a voice. And part of that is by beginning to think about, what is my positive purpose? So what we do is we ask kids to set an expectation. We could do this every marking period. We could do it on a half-year basis. We ask kids to set 3 goals in these areas. 1, 3 things I'm going to do to make myself better. 3 things I'm going to do to make my classroom or group better. 3 things I'm going to do to make my school or program better. And 3 things I'm going to do to make the wider community and world better. For a lot of kids, the idea that their voice matters, that they affect their classroom, their group, their school, their program, and the wider world is very new to them. One really good way to do this at the beginning of the school year is to ask students to create legacy cards. And you could do this in teams, groups, classrooms, etc. You tell your kids, imagine in June, the principal of the school, or it could be the coach of a team, etc. Principal of the school is going to stand up and is going to have an index card. And on that card, he or she is going to read out what you did in this past year to make yourself better, your classroom better, your school or program or team better, and make the community and wider world better. And so my question is, what do you want to have said about you? I want you to write down now the card that you'd like the principal to read in June. So you see how we begin to set the stage with techniques like this, and we begin to get kids to start to take responsibility for having an impact. By writing down their goals, not only are they easier to remember, but they begin to foster actual planning. And we find it's very often useful to have kids pair up and have them have buddies. So that, in other words, I will help you reach your goals, you will help me reach my goals. And this way, outside of the formal classroom context, we're still responsible for one another to help make one another better. Some of you are familiar with, I'm sure, the concept of SMART goals, goals that are specific, measurable, active, realistic, and time frame. So again, we want our kids, as they are setting their goals and thinking about the things they're going to do, to be realistic, to be specific, and that they should be active. And these aren't things that are going to happen to them. These are things that they are going to do. Again, part of youth voice is building in that sense of responsibility for what it takes to make things happen. And you see, youth voice is a good term, but to me, and in the work that I've done, what we're really talking about is youth voice and action. So let's start talking about the practical ways to increase student voice. And some of these may seem trivial, but they are incredibly powerful. First, greet all students by name when they enter the school or classroom. There is tremendous power in students being recognized. You are here. I notice you. I validate you. The use of students' names itself is powerful, and when they're greeted when they walk in the school building, it sets a tone for the day that your presence in this classroom, school, program matter. Second, begin or end individual classes or the school day with brief periods of time for students to reflect on what they've learned and what they might want to learn next. And that's sort of an example of legacy cards. But kids benefit from opportunities to reflect. Reflection is a way of finding your voice. Reflection is a way of being able to start to identify what you think about what has happened to you. How am I connecting to what I'm learning? What do I want to learn more about? What do I need clarified? These reflections begin to set the stage for greater opportunities for youth voice. And as the kids engage in these reflections, day after day after day, it builds their confidence, builds their voice, and it communicates to their teachers and group leaders, and coaches, etc., that they're engaged, that they care. And that leads to a very positive reciprocal cycle of recognition. Be sure to create rules in your classroom in your team, in your school, that recognize positive behaviors such as cooperation, caring, helping, encouragement, and support. And please make sure that any rules of conduct and discipline are clear, firm, fair, and consistent. That kids are hesitant to have voice in an environment that they know has favoritism. And so when the kids feel that they've got a level playing field in their classroom or their team, when they feel that sense of support around them, they are more likely to speak up and act positively. And of course, use culturally responsive pedagogy. Bring students' cultures and lives into the classrooms and schools. Sometimes the curriculum doesn't always adequately mirror the background of the students who are in the classroom. And so we need to take some steps to make sure that the kids feel recognized. Again, if our students automatically were feeling a great sense of engagement and voice, we wouldn't have to do these things, but they're not. So we have to bring them along intelligently in a sophisticated way. And that starts by helping them see that who they are is accepted in the classroom, in the school, on the team, because their background is reflected in what we talk about, what we do, what we care about. Ask students what kind of learning environments have been most and least successful for them in the past, and use this information to guide instruction. You could do this in a classroom, beginning of a school year. You could do this at the start of a team. My colleagues in Special Olympics use this technique. And they basically have a card, two-sided card. One side of the card, ask the kids, what kind of classrooms, what's gone on in classrooms that have been most successful for you? And what's gone on in classrooms that have been least successful for you? What similarly for teams, what kind of coaching have you found most inspiring? And what kind of coaching have you found most limiting or even most frustrating? Not mentioning names, but being specific about these things. Here again, you're asking my opinion. You are reaching to me and saying, I want to know what you think. And that is a key step in having voice. And of course, increasing students' opportunities for engagement and empowerment. So now we will turn our attention to what are the opportunities that we need to provide that kids can take advantage of to truly find and express their voice and turn it into action. So here are some best practices. Number one, genuine participation in school governance and student government. I'm sure many of you remember being in school, having a student government that was elected, and then you never heard from them again. Or if you did hear from them again, you never had input into them. John Dewey said that in order to become engaged in democracy, students need to live democracy, not just learn about democracy. So that starts by participation in a genuine student government. So in our Mosaic project, to give you an example, in every advisory period or homeroom, there were 2 elected student ambassadors, one male, one female. And these student ambassadors would be the liaison from the homeroom or the advisory to the student council. When there were issues that they wanted to bring to the attention of student council, the ambassadors would do that. When the student council wanted to get the input from the classroom or advisory, they would ask the ambassadors to lead a discussion and conversation about issues. And so classes became active sites of problem solving that had a connection to the places where the decisions and actions were being taken with school administration. Right? The degrees of separation were shrunk. Number 2, buddies, mentors, and tutors. Many people find their voice by teaching others. The opportunity for mentoring and tutoring is something we underutilize in school. One of my colleagues, Ray Pacey, who's principal of 2 high schools in Virginia, and each high school, he had every 11th grade student be a buddy or a mentor to a 9th grade student. Every 12th grade student was a buddy or a mentor to a 10th grade student. When the incoming 9th graders became 11th graders, they were thrilled to become the buddies and mentors of the 9th graders. But what this meant was that the school trusted students to bring on their peers, to bring them along, to support them. Every student was either a mentor or a mentee, and every student would be a mentor at some point, which expresses a lot of confidence. And of course, it helps students feel a great sense of responsibility. Students as researchers. This is something I learned in the UK. Very often, teachers, when they're in their classrooms, consciously or subconsciously, don't call on all students equally, often favor one side of the room to another, and sometimes actually favor a portion of the room, like the front or the back. And so in students as researchers, students take turns monitoring the teacher and just monitoring which way the teacher is looking, which side of the room, whether the teacher is calling more on boys than girls or members of different ethnic groups more than the other. And this is a public activity. This is not meant to be a criticism. This is a recognition that we all have biases. Some of those biases as to whether we look left or right have nothing to do with anything other than just the way we're wired. And so by enlisting students as researchers, here again, we're giving them great trust. And we're basically saying, look, I want you to give me feedback about my teaching style, strategy, and behavior so I can get better. Just like I, the teacher, give you feedback so you can get better. Nothing personal in this, right? It's all in the shared interest of helping teachers be more effective. And students also can be researchers to find out the opinions of their classmates about key issues going on in the school, which links into number 4, feedback and sharing opportunities, including in academics. Students benefit tremendously when they are asked, well, what did you think about that lesson? What did you think about that unit? What did you think about that topic? And you know, given structured opportunity for feedback. Sometimes that feedback might be anonymous. Sometimes it might be having a collection box someplace that students can drop their cards into. And sometimes it's an open conversation that teachers and group leaders have with students to get their opinion. But this is something that we underutilize because we need to remember that if students don't find something engaging, they're very unlikely to remember it. And so their opinions are useful guides. And we have developed many social and emotional learning programs over the years. And we have found that when we include in the program an activity that the kids hate, well, it just doesn't go well. And so why bother? Even if the activity is well structured, we thought we would have the kids do a family crest as one social emotional learning activity. And we had what a wonderful lesson. And the kids would go and talk to their parents, whatever. Boy, they hated it. They hated it. And so we got rid of it. I mean, we thought it was a fabulous lesson, but the kids just didn't like it for reasons that, you know, I don't need to go into now, but without that feedback, we would never have known. So give kids opportunities to have feedback. You have an assembly, give the kids a survey. What did you think of this? How could it have been better? Always asking that question. How could it have been better? Open forums for school problem solving. So who knows better than the kids what's going on in the school? And why are we not enlisting their ideas for how to deal with harassment, intimidation, and bullying, alcohol, tobacco, and other drug use, cyberbullying, cheating? The problems of the school are the problems of the students. So I work with one principal, Tony Bensavenga, who would meet once a marking period with each grade level, all the 6th graders. He has middle school principals, 6th graders, then the 7th graders, 8th graders. He would basically have them all come into the auditorium and he would say, I want you to tell me what I and the rest of the staff can do to make this school better, and what are you going to do to help make that happen? Now, the first time he asked this question, the students sit there, especially the sixth graders in the beginning of the year, they sit there, they're dumbfounded. No one's ever asked them this question. But he asks it over and over and over again. And pretty soon the kids start to raise their hands and talk about their ideas about how to make the school better. And there are so many areas in which they have ideas. Some of it's about decoration. Some of it's about the bathrooms. Some of it is about how things are organized in the main office, even what the process is of helping the kids enter and leave the school building. They've got great ideas about everything. We have to give them forums for being part of the solution to the problem of how do we make the school better. Number 6, staff student committee involvement. This is another thing I learned from the UK. So we have a lot of committees, right? Where we have faculty get together, HIB, you know, all these problem areas, culture and climate committees, character committees, discipline committees. But why not have students involved in those committees? I mean, after all, they're the ones who are going to be affected by the policies. And it's just like the family crest. We could create a policy that we think is fantastic. But if the kids just don't get it or feel offended by it, not going to work. So let the kids be on the committees, or have the kids be part of shadow committees that have input into the main committee's work. And here's my favorite. In some schools, high schools, they have students on the hiring committee. Now, they don't have a vote, but they have a say. And very often, kids can sniff out who's the best candidate. Now, I actually did this at my university when we were hiring. I invited grad students to meet with the candidates and have input into the faculty decision. They didn't have a vote, but they had input. And it was very interesting. We had 2 candidates. One had an unbelievable resume and a track record of getting grants and awards and you name it, just clearly a distinguished candidate. And another one who had wonderful credentials, but certainly not to the degree of the first candidate. After the students met with each of them for lunch and a conversation, the students came back to the faculty and said, well, we want you to hire the second guy, not the first guy. Well, why is that? Because in our conversation with the first guy used the word I and me all the time and asked almost nothing about us. Our conversation with the second person, he said almost always about you. He was just interested in us. So we feel that that's going to be somebody that we can learn better from. So we took that very much to heart because we also thought about this person as a colleague in the department. And the decision was made to take the second person. And it was never a decision we regretted. The second person has a fantastic career. And we've continued to involve students in giving us input because they see things that others don't see. And because they're ultimately the ones who are going to have to live with the results of the committee recommendations. Number 7, opportunities for reflection. So opportunities for reflection basically means that people do find their voice as a result of expressing themselves. And before they express themselves out to the world, they benefit from expressing themselves on paper, and with some frequency, and maybe knowing that no one's going to look at it. That's a decision that you can make. But kids benefit from being given the opportunity to reflect. There's a program called the Responsive Classroom Program, and the evidence of that program shows very clearly that when you give students greetings as they walk in the door, when they have a little time in the morning to have a morning meeting, a classroom conversation, a little something before the actual start of the day, and when they get an opportunity to reflect at the end of a class or at the end of the day, their academic performance goes up, their rates of violence go down, and even their attendance gets better. So why is this? Well, mainly it's because the opportunity for reflection creates value and ownership in what's going on in the school. So you've welcomed me. I know you care about me. You've given me a little opportunity to express myself about something before we start the school day, so it's not like a factory. And then at the end of the day, you give me a chance to reflect on what happened, as opposed to just trying to maximize every instructional minute. That is a recipe for disaster. A little reflection time toward the end of a day or the end of a period will yield much more in terms of sustained and integrated learning than if you added on more new stuff in that same little period of time. And then finally, number 8, students taking action together. This is a very important program of our social emotional learning lab. You'll be able to find out a lot more about it at the web link, secdlab.org/stat. But I'm going to tell you a bit about it now. The possibilities for youth action are far greater than we might realize. Our youth are not only ready to have voice, but they're ready for social action. We want to turn our students from complainers to activists, from bystanders to upstanders, from feeling defeated by the system to engaged in changing the system. And a key way to do that is to teach your students a strategy for addressing personal, classroom, school, community, or global problems or issues. Teach them a strategy for how to understand social studies, history, civics. Even in the use of clubs, we can use these strategies. I hope that as you listen and think about the specifics of these strategies, you'll say to yourself, you know, I could run a group for kids based on these strategies as opposed to a remediation group, as opposed to an anger management group or something. I can run a kind of an empowerment group with kids, getting them to think about and how to tackle social issues that matter. And in the process of doing that, building a lot of essential skills. So you'll see what I mean. Students taking action together, or what we call STAT, is directed towards civil classrooms, civil schools, and a civil society. And by civil, I don't mean compliant. I mean civilized. One of the purposes of STAT is to build students' social, emotional, and character development to create dialogue and civility among diverse students and a sense of empowerment and civic engagement. Many schools now are concerned with social emotional learning. Social, emotional, and character development is our lab's brand of SEL. We feel it's important to include the character dimension. And we feel that civic engagement is, in a way, not only a set of skills, but it's a set of commitments and dispositions that speak to our character. Another purpose of STAT is to foster deeper thinking and engagement about issues in the classroom, school, community, and world. You know, in an age of Twitter, where you express yourself fully with relatively few characters, we need our kids to think deeper about the issues that our society is confronting. They've had some very poor role modeling in the public about politicians communicating their business through tweets. The public needs and deserves more. We cannot oversimplify democracy and sustain our democracy. Indeed, civic engagement is based on focal, social, emotional skills. If you don't have these skills, it's very hard to imagine being civically engaged. Number one, empathy, that we really care for what's happening to the people around us, including people that we may not necessarily know well or even always agree with. Perspective taking. Can we understand what's happening from the point of view of other people? This is important. You know, again, voice without nuance. It can be just like a machete slashing away without care about who's being cut. So we need to have some perspective taking, communication, clear, appropriate communication. Too often, our kids communicate in the ways that they like to be communicated to, but that are inappropriate for the context in which they're communicating. I'll give you a quick example. At Rutgers, I'll get an email that'll say, "Hey, prof." Hey, prof, that's how it starts. I will return the email to the student and I'll say, in our psychology department, we have a formula. Hey plus prof equals delete. And I say that because I have colleagues who, when they see "Hey, prof," boom, they hit delete, they're not reading it. Now, I don't care. I don't care. But many people do care. So if you want to get faculty member to read your email, try something like, "Dear esteemed professor, dear wise one," or something like that, not "Hey, prof." Right? Social problem solving, skill number 4, the ability to have a strategy, a specific strategy to figure out what's going on with an issue or problem. How do people feel about it? What are their different perspectives? What are the options they have or did have? The consequences of what happened or might happen. How do we implement the plan in an effective way? And then how do we learn from experience so the next time we do things better? And finally, emotion regulation. Can we manage our strong feelings? Why? Because in a democracy, people are going to disagree with you. And every time you get disagreed with, you can't smack people. And you can't run away. You got to hang in. And when the group process is not going the way you want it to go, you can't just sort of put in your earbuds and tune out. You've got to be able to engage. So emotion regulation, the ability to manage our strong emotions, both positive and negative, is an essential skill inherent in the democratic process and inherent in civic engagement, where again, things will not always go the way you want them to go. So there are 4 instructional or group leading strategies that promote students being able to get along better with each other and being civically engaged. These are the STAT strategies. Number 1, peer opinion sharing. How do we get kids to listen respectfully to their peers' opinions? An activity called Yes, No, Maybe, which will demonstrate. Respectful empathic debate, which is a specific approach to debate that asks students to argue from the perspective of all sides of an issue, including the one they disagree with. A plan problem solving, and this is giving kids like a social problem solving strategy that they can use for analyzing social issues, historical issues, current events, problems of the school, so that the kids can internalize that problem-solving strategy and use it effectively in many different contexts. And finally, audience-focused communication. How do kids learn to be prepared for and share what they've learned with others in ways that take into account the context and perspective of the audience? You're going to be presenting your work to a group of parents at a parents' night. Well, what do we know about the parents? What do we think they'd like to see? How serious and detailed do we want to be? How entertaining do we want to be? How do we want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to present? You know, since the parents are out there, presumably to see each of their kids do something, right? So getting perspective before presentation, even if you're going to just get up in front of the class, think first about, well, how would my classmates most appreciate this? Audience-focused communication even includes handing in a paper to your teacher. What's the teacher going to think when they get this, if it's a sloppy mess? Right? Because that is your communication. When you hand in something that's a sloppy mess, you're communicating something to the teacher. And if it's not your intention to communicate that you don't care about this work, then you may want to rethink how you're engaging in audience-focused communication. So we're teaching kids who analyze social issues, make plans, learn stuff, have ideas. How do I then enact these ideas with people, like maybe people in the school administration, that takes their perspective into account, that takes into account how much time I'm really going to have to do this presentation? Okay? We're teaching the kids a lot of real world skills. You know, when I give legislative testimony, I have 5 minutes, sometimes 3. And if I At the end of that time, it's like the gong show. Zoop, the hook comes out, I'm done. If I talk too fast, no one's going to understand what I have to say. If I don't finish what I have to say because I didn't plan for the time frame, they're also not going to invite me back. So there's a lot of real world reality for kids across all subject areas. And how do I present myself effectively to other people? So here's a yes, no, maybe, right? You make a statement. Gangs give people a sense of purpose. Think about that statement. Gangs give people a sense of purpose. If you think yes, then if we were in a classroom or a room, I would tell you, go to the left side of the room if you think yes. If you think no, I say, go to the right side of the room. If maybe you're not quite sure, go to the back of the room. When you get there, I want to have 2 or 3 people in the yes, no, and maybe groups of 2 or 3. Say why. Why did you say yes? Why did you say no? Why did you say maybe? So they have these little conversations. And then somebody from those little trios are going to report out. Okay, so yes group, why did different people say yes? Our group said yes for this reason. Our group said yes for that reason. Our group said, and then the no group, and the maybe group. And then everybody sits down. That's it. Yes, no, maybe is teaching respectful peer listening, dialogue. And over the course of a year, as you have a number of these yes, no, maybes, kids engage with each other in different subgroups. They hear what their peers are thinking about issues. And the idea is to broaden their perspective, help them have a sense of empathy, help them feel as if, you know, everybody doesn't think the way I think, and maybe they even have some good reasons. Or even the people that think the way I think, like if I'm in the yes group, they had yes for a different reason. Never occurred to me, but that's a pretty good reason too. Or the no group or the maybe group, right? So this enables kids also to reflect on current events, events in history. Why did things happen? A yes, no, maybe about why certain actions were taken in history. You could even do it in literature, why certain characters did what they did. Yes, no, maybe. Right? Here are a couple of other examples, right? All schools should have metal detectors for the protection of students and staff. Kids have opinions about that. And I've heard some opinions that I never would have expected to hear that made me think. And the one on the bottom is a good way of introducing greater youth voice. Students should participate in school communities about bullying, drugs, and alcohol and discipline. Yes, no, maybe. You may have to do that one with your colleagues, but you could also do it with kids. And it may be interesting to see which kids say yes or no or maybe and why. But here again, it's very powerful and it begins to give a lot of skill building for kids toward youth voice. The planned problem solving strategy I mentioned, here's a little bit of an elaboration of it. The 4 steps in general, and there's much more detail at our website, secd.org/stat. Create a problem description. You know, what's the problem? How did different groups feel about it? What are the different options or ideas that different groups had? What were the detailed ways in which they tried to carry out those options? And then how did it go? And what can we learn from that for next time? This is a strategy that can be used in history to talk about things like the Civil War, things like the Western conquest. Difficult topics can be handled with this strategy by recognizing that we need to understand people's points of view without demonizing them. That history was made by people making decisions. We may not agree with those decisions, but we need to understand those decisions. And we can't demonize the position and the people. We need to understand it. We can reject it, but we need to take it from a position of understanding and in some cases respecting the perspective of people, because, you know, sometimes if we were there then, we can't be so sure we'd act the way we're sure we'd act now. Right? So a little humility is part of this process as well. So here is an example of STAT in action in a problem. We asked loads of middle school kids, what's the biggest problem in middle school right now? And we were shocked but we heard it over and over again, just cafeteria food. And kids complain about it all the time. So we feel, all right, if we're gonna, let's introduce STAT with this common problem and introduce the plan process. And we'll see how it works. We start off with a yes, no, maybe, or maybe a debate. There's nothing students can do to change the food that is served in the cafeteria. These are adult decisions only. So kids, again, do you think yes? Do you think no? Do you think maybe? Why did you say yes, no, maybe? So we start out by getting the range of perspectives. Then we start to think about what are the problems related to the food in cafeteria. Let's start to specify what are the problems, what are the issues, and how does this whole thing look from the perspective of teachers, administrators, and food preparation and servers? Because there's a lot of things going on. How do people feel? How do the servers feel when they're berated constantly by the kids? How do the kids feel when they're constantly being given stuff that they don't like, right? And then we think about, well, then what options? What are the options? What does the problem look like from the perspective of the kids, administrators, food preparers, servers, and how could things be solved? It's so often good in a classroom to have kids be in groups of 4 or 5, and each of the groups is separately working on the same issue, but from their own perspective, and then they come together and share their process and their suggestions, and usually from that group sharing, one even better solution comes up, right? How can the idea be carried out? Who has to do what, when, where, what obstacles might there be? How are they going to get addressed? How are we going to know if the plan's been successful, i.e., how can we use feedback to improve the plan? Audience-focused communication considerations include, well, you know, if we have to present this to the school board or to the budget committee or to parents or somebody, you know, how are we going to present this plan? And then after the plan is tried, how to work, right? Maybe there are still subsets of kids who don't like the changes in the cafeteria. And so what can we learn and how can we improve things? This is a framework that can be used for many other school issues: bullying, drugs, gangs, cheating, discipline, and also history and current events, right? Why did this happen? What were the options? What else might they have done? And what might have happened if they did that? So you see, we're giving the kids the ability not only to have input in the present, but to rethink the past with us. Very important. So for more materials and information about our lab, you can go to secdlab.org/stat. You can email us about questions about carrying out some of these activities. But again, just to summarize, we talked about a number of different techniques that help prepare and give youth a chance for voice. We recognize that it must be more than voice. It must be voice and action. And with action comes responsibility, becomes planning, preparing, thinking about the consequences, and really owning the issue and staying with it. This is what kids need to do in a democracy. This is what they need to do as contributors to their classrooms and schools and communities. Coming soon are 2 resources that I hope you'll find helpful. One is a book that has a lot more about STAT, including lesson plans relating to social justice, gender, and economic issues. And then toward the idea of helping the kids start out the day with some voice, a book called Morning Classroom Conversations, 5 or 10-minute activities that you can do in any homeroom or advisory to help build your kids' social, emotional, character, and communication skills every day. So please be on the lookout for those resources. And finally, our follow-up meeting, July 1st, 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to participate, send me an email with your address to secdlab@gmail.com. I will then send you a Zoom link to that meeting. And in advance of the meeting, if you have any questions that you'd like to make sure get addressed, please send those along. So it was a pleasure to do this with you. I hope that you have the opportunity to follow up in July, but more importantly, put these techniques to use for the benefit of your students. Thanks very much.